Adora, I'd like to ask you broadly, are there any other current, more broad regulatory trends that our audience should know or keep an eye out for?
Current or broad regulatory trends. Well, I would say that, and we didn't really touch on this today, but there has been for many years now the discussion of harmonization across regions and what areas we would be beneficial to consider harmonizing versus not. And I think we have to be very thoughtful in how we approach the specific areas for harmonization. It can be beneficial for sponsors, right? Most of these trials are multinational, and so having regulatory requirements that are vastly different from country to country just adds a significant amount of burden. And so I think that's an area that I would say is a trend. Convergence versus harmonization, in which areas we would do one versus the other. That's a trend that we should continue to watch as far as cell and gene therapy is concerned. And then also similarly, I would say, or relatedly, reliance. So sponsors being able to rely on reviews performed by health authorities, being able to rely on reviews performed by other health authorities to support their approval. Especially when we start to think about globalization of these products, to the extent that some of this can be streamlined through mechanisms such as, Project Orbis, which I know is not quite yet at CBER yet, but hopefully there's a future there for some of these mechanisms to allow for broader review and approval of these products globally.
Sure, thank you. I want to take a little bit of time now to address our audience questions. And first up, what have been successful and unsuccessful strategies to convince the regulators that current regulation requirements are either inappropriate or alternatively excessively burdensome for cell and gene-based therapies? Either one of you can take a shot at it first, but Adora, if you'd like to go first, that's fine.
Sure. Well, I guess one clear approach to doing that is commenting on the regulations and guidances when they are issued. And so for folks that are tuned in, when FDA publishes a draft guidance or a proposed rule through the Federal Register, they usually provide a period of time where stakeholders can submit comments to what has been published. And so I encourage folks, as guidances or regulations are issued that are problematic, the more you submit those letters to FDA, the more they're able to really listen and consider the real issues with the implementation from the stakeholder perspective. And they do actually read and review every single letter that is submitted. I know this because I used to lead a division that was in charge of developing policies. So that's one area. Another area that I would suggest for folks that are considering becoming active in organizations can be really helpful and instrumental in helping to create and facilitate interactions with FDA, especially to talk about where there might be issues. So, organizations like ASGCT, if you're looking for individual membership, or even ARM, if your company is looking to membership to join an organization that can help provide you with a voice. And, there are many other organizations, but these groups will quite often, submit industry-wide comments to FDA. They'll have meetings with FDA to talk through some of the broader industry challenges. So those are some opportunities, and I would encourage you to look into those two as ways to provide feedback on problematic guidances or regulations.
Great, thank you. That's excellent feedback and recommendation. Nina, I'd like to ask this question of you. When you get written feedback about a program, how quickly should you be leveraging this to other programs? So it seems like a timeline question.
Yeah, I think there's no reason to wait. I think sort of leveraging across the platform is a huge opportunity to think about gaining efficiencies, right? As we are learning more, as FDA is learning more, especially like, for example, AAV gene therapy, right? There's been a lot of activity in this space, and using one platform to try to take learnings for another, I think is important. And so I guess it's hard to answer that question depending on the feedback that you get. But if there are ways to take those extrapolations and apply to another program, I think we could do that right away. There's no reason not to.
Got it. Got it. So the sooner the better.
Yeah.
Adora, I have a question for you from the audience. How early would you advise a preclinical stage cell and gene therapy company to reach out to CBER?
Early. As soon as you have your development candidate. I mean, yeah, you know, that's one of the reasons that that CBER rolled out the Interact opportunities. Because if you recall, we have the pre-IND, but then there's the preclinical that happens well before that. And so the Interact is really, provides an opportunity for some of those very early discussions well before you're prepared to go into the clinic. And so under PDUFA 7, Interact is actually now a PDUFA meeting that can be requested. It has associated timelines. FDA has issued, an SOPP on the Interact, and I'm sure with it now being part of PDUFA will be revised and rolled into their meeting guidance. But I definitely encourage, having that early discussion, well before you're ready to go into the clinic with FDA, and leveraging the Interact as an opportunity to do so.
Gotcha. Okay. Finally, I'd like to just end with maybe another sort of helpful, broader question for both of you. And maybe, Nina, we could start with you. What would you recommend your, say, top best practices for a robust regulatory strategy? Top 2-3 points or whatever you see fit, but basically the very best practices for top-notch regulatory strategy.
Yeah, so I think very strong science, bringing that scientific perspective. As Adora said, a lot of these reviewers don't have the background, and especially when it comes to rare diseases. And so making sure you have a robust scientific foundation, clinical perspective is huge to be able to bring. Patients we already touched on. And then also just being a part of broader public-private partnerships where if we can be aligned from the outside and work with the agency, it not only helps them, but obviously helps us to get to some of those standardizations and harmonization that's needed. So I think the approach on both sides would be to bring that external stakeholder voice together and do as much as we can to align, to approach the agency with recommendations and an openness to collaborate and to move the field forward.
Wonderful. Thank you. Dora, same question. Best practices for the very best robust regulatory strategy.
I agree with all that Nina has laid out. And so what I will add to it is what we typically hear from FDA: reach out to FDA early and often. I know it's sort of, you hear that and you just shake your head, but it is true. And that's why we work so hard to get these meetings available and during different time points in development. There's actually a new one that's included in PDUFA, which is after you've held your meeting, or if you've received a written response only, you can actually follow up with FDA. If there's something that's still unclear or ambiguous, you have a period of time, I think it's 20 days, where you can follow up and have an additional response. So that's also an opportunity. So early and often interaction, work with the patient community. I think that is critical for a successful regulatory strategy, especially in the rare disease space. Leverage your regulatory precedent. I know we don't have that much precedent in the cell and gene, just given the limited number of products that have been developed. But I can't say, we're growing that amount of precedent. So I can't say enough about leveraging that precedent and incorporating it into your already solid clinical development strategy.